Mr. Jason VanRuler, thank you so much, my friend, for joining us today. I'm so grateful for our friendship and just the person you are, not only to me but to so many. It's funny. I think our first time meeting was at a gym here in Lynchburg, Virginia, with some mutual friends here. So first time getting to know each other. It was super early and it was sweaty, and that's our first impression. But again, man, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this. And, those are the friendships that last. The ones that are up a little earlier than you'd wake up, doing hard things. I mean, that's what really makes a friendship stick.
That's right,
So,
man.
so
I
that worked.
remember that first. I remember that morning. We're like getting ready to be done, and Joshua, a mutual friend, he's like, "Okay, we're gonna do one more thing." We finished that last thing, and then I'm looking over to my left, and up goes Jason, man, taking a lap around the track. I'm like, "This guy is different. there's,
This
there's something
guy's this
different
guy's
about
got
this guy."
something wrong with him. Yeah, it was obvious from the day we met. Yes.
Oh man, not at all, bro. Well, thank you again for being with us here on the podcast. Our goal and our mission is to highlight, how God is always in the business of shaping us and pruning us to become more like Him and bear more into His image. Jason, you're a licensed therapist. You're an author of a book that we'll get into today. You're a sought-after speaker, but it hasn't always been that way. Your story has a lot more entailed that we know of from the outside looking in, and I would love to create a space for you up front to really share that story and really just tell our listeners, hey, this is who I am, this is my life, and these are the things that I've gone through really to shape the person that I've become today.
Yeah, well, I just appreciate and I'm grateful that you would give me space to share that. And yeah, I mean, things are great today. And there's been a lot that I can celebrate, I think, but that hasn't always been my whole life. And isn't that true for all of us, right?
Yeah.
As we have the
Yep.
highs and the lows. And so, I grew up and had a pretty idyllic childhood until about age 8, and my parents divorced. And so when they divorced, really everything changed. And so it was kind of this, hey, everything's going to be perfect and wonderful. And then it was really not. And so from 8 to 18, things just looked dramatically different. And so for me, went through some trauma and some abuse during that time period. And so it went from setting expectations to life is going to be so easy to then quickly being met with life is going to be so hard.
Yeah.
And so I did what probably a lot of people do when you leave the house at 18 and you're wounded, and I declared that I was going to do everything different, right? So I'm leaving you guys, and you just wait, you'll see. I'm going to be completely different. It's going to be great. You just watch.
Yeah.
And man, within a couple of years, like I just kind of burnt out. Like I went to college, was getting in trouble because I wasn't going to class, not motivated, doing all the things that I had sworn off. And I just found myself really in this position where I had kind of blamed everybody else for where my life had gone. And some bad stuff had happened. And so I was a bit justified in that. But I just said, like, this is everybody else's deal. And then I became an adult and I realized, like, now it's kind of my deal and I'm doing some of this.
Sure.
And so I had this moment in my early 20s where I just, and it's a little cliche, but like I just found myself looking in the mirror going, I don't really like this guy. This guy is not the guy that I thought I would be. I don't think it's the guy I'm called to be. I don't think it's my potential, but it's the guy I've settled for. And I don't want this.
Yeah.
And so for me, that was a really big day, and you don't harvest the seed the same day you plant it. So not everything changed that day. But for me, this seed was planted that maybe it could be different. And so since that moment, what I've really just tried to do is be really willing to ask questions and listen to answers and do the next right thing, and to let God be part of that. And that's led me here. And so that hasn't meant that from the moment I decided that it's been easy, but it just means the struggle has been different because I've at least known where to go for answers. And it's led me to this beautiful place I could have never imagined when I was a kid.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so funny. You're numerous one of the guests that we had so far, and it's just you look back at all these guys' lives, guys and gals, and it's like, man, how in the world could they come from that with who they are today? Like I never would have guessed that. Like knowing you, Jason. I mean, never would have guessed that would have been your story. Of I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that, I'm gonna rebel against my parent, whatever. Because I think it's easier, obviously, to look at today and to just assume that that's how it's always been. I've always kind of been this way. And something that we've done a tremendous job of trying to do on this platform is showcasing how there are some things, whether it's in our own will, whether it's God's will being a sickness or a suffering, or even like rebellion, personal rebellion. God is always using that to further make us more like Him. And if I could ask you this up front, Jason, as you look back on your story and you look back on your time growing up, maturing, even you coming to the faith, What would you say is the biggest thing for you that's like, man, this was a big moment in my life that God used to prune who I am today, and I really wouldn't be who I am without it?
Yeah, I think the moment for me was that I realized God is always talking to me if I'm willing to listen. And so that realization, you know, and some people might say, Jason, I could have saved you years and told you that. Yeah, well, I'm a slow learner, right? So
Yeah,
so that moment though, where I just stopped long enough to hear God's voice, I think for me just changed everything, because I just had felt so alone for such a long time, and like I had to kind of figure things out. And so getting to that place of like, actually, there's all the help you need if you're willing to stop and listen to it. That was a big deal for me, because it really challenged some of my beliefs. And then I just thought, okay, well, if that's all I have to do, I'm going to do that as much as I can. And that started to lead me in a different direction.
Yeah, that's really good. I think of the story of John 9, where the blind man goes up to Jesus and he's like, hey, I'm blind and I need to see, right? And the disciples go up to Jesus. They're like, hey, what did he do? You know, did his parents sin? Did he sin? Did he do a certain thing? And Jesus responds, he says, no, this is done so that the glory of God may be revealed, you know? And I think it's hard, man. It's so hard. And it's hard for us, especially to look back on our lives and say, why did this happen? Why did I go through this abuse, this hardship, this discouragement? And I think if we could just step outside of ourselves for a moment and trust that God is doing something in and through that to further not only shape us, but to use these things to help shape others, I think that will change everything about our lives today. And I want to ask you this as we're talking about this, because obviously you're a counselor. So now a big part of your life is now helping other people walk through this same path of trying to find freedom and healing and separation from their past mistakes or past bondages. And Jason, if I could ask you this here up front, what do you think is the biggest part about your experience that is helping you shape other people and their experience today? Like if you were to look back, and as you're doing this, what's something that as you carry what you've learned through your own story, now you're helping others today in the present in the same way?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And I just want to say too, God is so good, because that's John 9:7. That's one of my favorites, man. I love that, because it's so true. I think what I'm able to do to help people that's a little bit unique is that I get what it's like to be stuck. Yeah. And so I think that's a superpower, because I think unless you really have been stuck, or you've really been faced with a challenge where you didn't think you could get through it, it's hard to relate to people. And so one of the things that I love to do best is when someone says, no, you don't get it, and I get to go, oh, actually I do get it. Yeah. I do get it. I mean, maybe it's not exact, or it's, you know, you said this and I'd say this, but what I understand and what I tell myself about the struggles I went through is I went through those to better understand people who are struggling. Yeah. And one of the things I've known about people is when we can validate their experience and see them in the struggle, they're empowered to change. And so for me, that's where I try to meet people, is not in where I think they should be or where I want them to be, but in where they're at.
Absolutely. It's so interesting too, because I don't know about you, but if I'm being honest, if I'm talking with somebody who's trying to tell me about something that maybe they haven't experienced, it's obviously harder, because like, what do you really know about this brokenness? And I mean, I'll be honest with you up front, all the listeners know this, like I have a very similar story of kind of just jumping off the deep end, kind of doing what I want, you know, and then getting back to God at the end of the day. It's okay, I do need you, but because I've actually experienced that same thing. And I think that's a really powerful thing to use, especially in your field as you're going through these things. But here's the problem, Jason. I'm sure you've seen it, where a lot of people, they look at their life, they look at their struggles, their setbacks, their brokenness, and they say, I don't really want to tell anybody, right? I don't really want to be honest. I don't really want to share. And that can come through a multitude of reasons, right? It could be fear. It could be just they don't feel like it's necessary. They're not comfortable doing it. But there's a part of not only counseling in the medical field, as you know, but scripturally, I mean, this is a critical aspect of a healthy lifestyle, right? So what would you say, Jason? Why is it so important to be honest? I mean, even if it's not to a counselor, so to say, why should you live a life of authenticity and honesty? And does that really benefit yourself as a good character trait to have?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you just have to decide if you want to change or not, right? So if you want to be pursuing better, you have to tell people what's going on for you, because otherwise you don't actually ever grow, right? So the things we grow from are the things that we say that later we kind of cringe at, or the things we do that later we go, oh, I don't know why I did that. But if nobody sees it, we're never challenged to be different. And the thing I think is really hard with social media and different things is we always like to talk about the problem or the solution, but not the messy middle. You know, nobody's like telling you when they're in it, right? They're like, hey, Ryan, I had a problem once and now today it's solved. And that's kind of like our favorite way to share that. Not many of us say like, no, I'm in the thick of it. Like I'm literally in the thick of it right now. And yet the funny thing is, when you do that, people connect with you. And so the thing is that we trick ourselves into thinking that if we told the truth about our story, that people wouldn't love us or they wouldn't listen. But the reality is that's where we connect to other people, both to get help and give help. But we have to tell them about the messy middle.
Absolutely. I've heard it said that weakness is wisdom, right? It's actually stronger, to be honest, because anyone can be impressed with your strengths, right? Everyone's always, like you said, social media, it's always a good thing to see what you're good at. But really, people connect with you in your weaknesses. And I think what you said relates to a lot of people today, of how a lot of us are in that middle spot, right? We're not just at the beginning. We're not at the end where it's like conquered, victory won. We're kind of in that messy sanctification spot where we're still being worked on, right? And for you, Jason, if you've experienced this in your own life, what would you say a practical step? If I'm the person I'm stuck in the middle of like, yeah, I've had some freedom, right? I wouldn't say I'm completely freed. Honestly, I don't really know what it means. Like, am I really free? I'm not really sure. What would you say to the person that's in the middle there? What should I do to further find freedom and to continue on this path of healing in my life?
Yeah, I think it's just find one person who's one step ahead. So that's people come to me and they say, Jason, you've gotten to write a book and you've gotten to speak and do all these big things. And how did you do that? You must be so smart. And I'm like, I'm not that smart. I'm a pretty simple guy. And they're like, well, what's your secret? And I'm like, my secret is I go to people a step ahead and I ask them what they did. And then I do it. And that's kind of the thing, is like, it can be that simple, is wherever you're at, find someone who could relate and who's one step ahead and ask them how they got there. Yeah. And then do it. And along the way, you might find it works, it doesn't work, you refine it. But if you have the willingness to keep showing up that way, life will get better, right? But it's really an issue of, am I willing to ask the question and see it through?
Absolutely. I know, biblically speaking, the power of community is just so important in your life. And just having other people to walk alongside of as you go through this journey. And I want to ask you this. I just thought of this as you mentioned this, because a lot of people, when they look at their lives, they're in this middle spot, right? They're having freedom. They're having some setback here and there, 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of thing. And they would ask the question, okay, but where's the final destination? Like, what's the end goal? What does it mean to be freed? Because I think a lot of us, we look at people around the world or leaders, pastors, even people like you, Jason. It's okay, well, Jason's definitely freed. He's at that end stage goal, but I don't really know what that looks like. So practically speaking, how would you answer that question? Like, how can I say confidently, man, this is what freedom looks like? Is it perfection or is it something different?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's perfection, and I've nailed it, Ryan. So I have attained perfection. Just ask my wife. Okay. She definitely thinks so. No, I mean, here's what's funny about getting to work with so many different people is that one person's freedom is the start of another person's journey. And so the thing is like, if we're doing this right, we're just always pursuing what we're called to do. And that's just ongoing. And we just keep getting better and better over time. But I think the freedom part is that we look back on where we started and we see that there's distance between where we started and where we are today. And that's the important thing, is we need to be able to look back and see a change. And so what I tell people is like, this is just an ongoing thing, and it's really a lifestyle issue. It's committing to a lifestyle of pursuing better. And I would say, as a faith person, pursuing what you're called to. Like, that's what we're really trying to do. And so just realize that's a spectrum. And everybody's on that spectrum, and some are farther ahead than others, but still not as far as someone else. And that's okay. Yeah,
absolutely. I've said it myself. I think the progression may be more important than the perfection, right? And the trajectory of your life is really what you have to measure by, especially, I was talking with somebody the other day, like, we live in this fallen state, in a sinful world where we're just groaning for redemption, for Lord Jesus to come back and save all of us. And I think to think that at some point we're going to get to a point where we're perfect is unreasonable. Like, I don't think that's possible. But I think inwardly, the trajectory of your heart and the desires and intentions of who you are and who you want to be as you become this person, like, that's really a good measurement of where you're heading, right? Your next step is always based on the intention of your last step. And I think if we can continue to do those things, we will see, power in our lives. I think of the scripture in Revelation, right? You overcome by the blood of the Lamb and then the word of our testimony. And I think a lot of us think that God can't do anything with our shortcomings, our past mistakes. And he's like, no, he's used people all around the world since the beginning of time to do a lot of things in a lot of people's lives. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is the point, right? That is how it all works. And so the thing is, like, I don't ever blame somebody for desiring perfection, because we all do. We all want
Yeah.
heaven,
Yep.
right? So there's nothing wrong with wanting that. It's just who we want that from, right? And so I think it gets a little convoluted if we somehow think we're the person to be perfect.
Yes.
We're not. That's,
Yep.
you know, if we could be perfect, we'd have no need for Jesus. So we're not going to get there, but we can keep trying to get better and to be more like Jesus. Like that's possible, but perfection would be boring. I mean, imagine if we could be perfect, how boring that would be. There'd be nothing to talk about.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
it's just not going to happen.
That's good, man. So good. I want to transition here over to your book, Get Past Your Past, How Facing Your Broken Places Leads to True Connection. I said it up front, man, before we hit start, incredible book. I haven't had a chance to read a bit of it, but really, really good. We encourage all of our listeners to check that out. But to kind of start this conversation, a very vague question: how do I get past my past? I mean, like, what do I do? What are some practical steps to move past the things that I've once done and to release that to who I think I am right now?
Yeah. Well, the first step is a really hard step, actually. But the first step is just really acknowledging and recognizing if you're going to get past your past, that's actually on you to make the decision to do that. And that's really hard, because a lot of times people who are struggling with their past are really struggling with something that happened to them that they didn't deserve, right? So someone did something, or there was a situation, and that occurred and it hurt them, and they didn't do anything to deserve that. And so one of the first most difficult steps is just to say, even if I did nothing to deserve what happened to me, it's up to me to do something about it. Because nobody's going to come along and fix this thing for me the way I need it to be fixed. It's going to be up to me to take those steps. But there's an immense amount of freedom in admitting that, because then you have some ability to change your future. If everything that we need to heal from the past is contingent on somebody else, we're always going to be waiting for them to do something.
That's right.
And so one of the first best things is just to say, I guess this is on me to fix.
And here's my question for you, though, as we talk through this, because I know there are some people out there that are saying, like, oh, Jason, but you don't know, man. Like, you have no idea the abuse, the addiction, the hardship that I've gone through. And honestly, like, it's completely out of my control. Like, what was I supposed to do? You know, God kind of just gave me this lot, and I didn't really do anything to deserve it. As a counselor, kind of a twofold question here. I'm curious, do you treat those kind of perspectives differently, of the person where it's like, yeah, I went off my own way, I did this, I did that, this is where I ended up, or the other person where it's like, man, I've been abused the whole time and I don't really know what else to do? For both of those people, is there a similar ground of finding freedom for them?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say those people who say to me, you know, Jason, I was abused or traumatized, I didn't ask for any of that. I would say, yeah, me too. I get it. Right.
Yeah.
And so in no way am I saying, well, it's your fault. But what I'm saying is, like, at the end of the day, we're responsible for what we do with it. And so we have a decision to make, which is that we can honor a story that keeps us small, or we can start to write a new one. And that's a beautiful opportunity, but terrifying. Right.
Yeah.
And so to do that, we have to bet on ourselves. And that's really a challenge sometimes, especially if we've been hurt so much, it seems like that's impossible. But the approach that I take, whether you did it to yourself or it was done to you, it's kind of the same decision. Is just, am I willing to do something new to get a different future?
Yeah.
And the minute you say I'm willing, that starts opening the door to possibilities, which is really what people need.
Yeah, I was talking with somebody the other day about this very topic, and to add kind of my input here, I think it's hard, obviously, as you know, just to address and to confront these things in our own lives. But to push back a little bit on those kind of people, it's like, man, you can choose to be the victim your entire life and stay in the same place your entire life. And I think you're spot on. Like, at some point, you have to address the fault and the issue, have some sort of forgiveness and redemption in the story. But then at some point, it's up to you. Like, can I get past this and actually walk into freedom of who I want to be in the life that I truly want to live? And I think it's so hard for people to just wrap their mind around this reality, you know, because it's a victimized, you know, I'm at fault, like everything's against me, the world's not for me, and I can never actually find wins in my life because this is just a lot that God's given me. And I think from a faith perspective, and I want you to speak on this in a second here, but maybe there's a part of it where maybe God is using your story to actually shape who you become. And maybe the hardship is actually sent by him for you to actually trust and lean on him more. Have you seen that in your own life?
Yeah, I mean, that's why I'm here, right? I mean, it's been better than I could have imagined. in spite of what happened to me, because my story is now being used to help other people. I will say that doesn't always happen, right? Sometimes just bad things happen, and there is no happy outcome. It's just a bad thing. But I think for me, I'll just speak for myself. I think I, in some ways, kind of fell in love with my suffering. You know, I was so used to suffering that it became just my expectation. And so one of the first things that I really had to acknowledge is that life could be different, and I didn't have to suffer if I didn't want to. And so that was not easy, right? It was not easy to say, okay, well, I'm going to start to make some decisions, and it's on me, and I'm going to ask God into this. But I do think we tend to have habits even in our feelings. And so if our feelings, if the habit is to really love to suffer and love to feel bad, and we can just get used to it. And so sometimes with clients, I get to just say, like, hey, did you know there's a different way to live? Like, maybe nobody even ever told you, or maybe you didn't come from a family that saw it, but did you know that it's possible to live and not be unhappy all the time?
Yeah.
And let's take a step towards that.
Yeah, that's good. There is freedom, and you can live in freedom. That's a great reminder. And as we kind of move on here, I want to press this question at you, because maybe the listeners today are like, you know what, maybe Jason's right. You know, maybe there is freedom, and maybe there is a reason why I should move past my past. But the reality is it really that important? You know, like, if I am who I am today, that's in the past, it's done, doesn't really bother me today. If I don't confront those issues, like, how big of a deal is that for me today? Like, if I don't go back and think, man, I got to find redemption from here, I got to heal from this, does that really affect the person I am today, and why is that so important?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think sometimes people's hesitation with therapy is like, how long are we going to do this? Right? Are we going to sort through everything that ever happened in my life? And as a therapist that needs clients, I'm going to say yes. Ryan, I'm going to keep you in therapy your whole life, every day. No, I'm just kidding you. We're not going to do that. And here's the good news is, I don't think you have to talk about every bad thing that ever happened. But if you find yourself consistently stuck in similar situations, and you can connect that to past occurrences, there's probably some work to do. And so what I kind of talk to clients about is, it's like when someone passes away. You know, you go to the funeral and you go to the gravesite, and you pay your respects and you read the eulogy, and it's done, right? And there are some things that happen in our life that demand a eulogy that they haven't gotten yet. And so I'm not saying that's everything, but I'm saying if there are things in your history or your past that have not gotten the treatment they deserve, you need to give it to them, because that is the thing that helps us move forward. But also, no one's trying to live at the graveyard. So the thing is like, our job isn't to set up camp there. Our job is to go do what we need to do and then move forward.
Yeah, that's so good. And I think that's something we have to do in order to find freedom in our lives. And let me just ask you this up front here too, Jason, as we kind of come to a close here. What do you think is the best way for you as the counselor? Have you seen this implementing your faith into counseling people? Like, as you go through your counseling sessions, as you're helping people around the world, how have you looked to the cross and to the grace and the mercy of our Savior, Jesus Christ, to then implement these changes and to say, man, there can be hope, there can be freedom, there's goodness in the grace of God. How does that implement you into your daily job?
Yeah, and that's a big question. I mean, I think for me, my faith is my hope. You know, otherwise this would be a terrible job. I always tell clients, like, if there was no hope, this would be the worst job ever.
Yeah. Yep.
And I look to every client through that lens of like, how does God look at them? But truly, I'm just going to say, like, my prayer every time I meet with somebody is that I get out of the way and God shows up.
Yes.
And so I think, you know, whatever brilliant, amazing ideas I ever had, they pale in comparison to how God's going to speak to somebody. And so my hope is just to truly sit with someone and just love them in the time that I have with them, and be open to options and speak whatever wisdom I can. But the faith part of it is just the acknowledgement that any good thing or change isn't going to come from me. Right. I might get to facilitate the time and the space, but that's going to come from God. And so I always look at my sessions that way.
Absolutely. Can we be vessels of the Spirit for the living God to do what only He can do in the lives of everybody else?
Yeah, I'm not trying to compete. I learned I learned early on that's just not going to work for me. So there's no competition there.
Absolutely. We had Zach Clinton on a couple episodes ago, a mutual friend of ours, and he said the same thing of like, I can't go in there expecting to just save these people. You know, not only is that unrealistic for them, but it's unrealistic for me too. Like, I don't have that capacity. I don't have the power to do that. And I think it just further alongs the perspective that people like you have. It's like, yes, my job is to help people, but I understand that my help only comes from the Lord as well. And I'm just a vessel for the true shepherd to do what he needs to do in the lives of those he loves. Jason, as we wrap up here, typically on the show, I ask the guests to share something personal about this current season of life that they're in as they look at God shaping and pruning them today. You know, a lot of us, we think that, man, maybe God's work is just something that happens, you know, earlier in life when I had the struggles, when I had the troubles, and now that I'm here, I don't really go through anything. But if there's a pressing word on your heart today, my friend, about just how God is shaping you right now to implement who you become tomorrow, what would that word be?
Yeah. Wow. That is actually very relevant. Yeah. I've just been in a season, I think, with God of just trust and faith and just saying it's okay to invest in something bigger in the future, even if you don't see the outcome now. And that's, for me, that's a real faith thing, right? Just to say, like, I'm gonna work on writing, I'm gonna work on doing these things, and I might not see a return today, I might not see a return ever, but I'm gonna have faith that if I'm called to it, I'll do it. And so for me, that's a big step, just to say, like, yep, I'm not looking for the immediate return or outcome, but I'm just gonna do it anyway. And then I think the other thing that's really been going on for me is, can I slow down long enough to listen to the Lord? And I think I'm a great runner, and I'm really good at being busy. But I think God's like, yeah, I'm speaking to you all the time if you slow down enough to listen. And so I've really been focused in this season, slowing down enough to listen.
Can we slow down to hear the voice of the Lord when everything else in our life is going really, really fast? That's a good word, man. Jason, thank you so much for being with us today. Where can our listeners go to learn more just about you, your clinical practices, everything about you, for more information of what you do?
Yeah, jasonvr.com, or you can find me on social media at Jason VanRuler.
There you go. I would encourage all of our listeners to check out what Jason is doing to get his book, Get Past Your Past. And then there's another book coming out as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm working on the next one. So 2026, it'll be out.
2026. So keep an eye on that for that, all of our listeners. And just keep on checking out all that Jason is doing across the world to change lives. But thank you again, man, for being with us today. I'm so grateful for you and our friendship. And I just can't wait to see how God continues to use you to change the world.
Oh, Ryan, thank you so much. I'm grateful. We'll have to do the early morning workout again soon.
Absolutely.